Good morning. Thank you for joining me for this thoroughly enthusiastic review of Alan Dean Foster's Orphan Star. First of all, we've got this beautiful New English Library book. It's part of a series, and it's the second in the series. And the third one is The End of the Matter. I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about Alan Dean Foster himself and this series when I bring up the third book, so I'll glance over them here. Alan Dean Foster, American writer, born in the late 40s, I believe. Wrote a huge number of books, over 20 standalones, many series. Most people would seem to remember him from the fact that he wrote a lot of movie novelizations, including The Aliens. But allegedly, the first book in this series, The Tarim Krang, was his first published novel. And that was from 1972, and I've reviewed it. It's the last review on my channel. You can check it out if you like. In between that happened Blood Hype. That is apparently in the same universe as these books, the Humanx Commonwealth. I owned that book, but I haven't read it. That was published in 73. Then there was one called Ice Rigger, published in 1974, and then along came Orphan Star, the second in the series. Now it's interesting that on the back of this one it says Orphan Star is the sequel to the Tarim Krang and is the second book in a brilliant new sequence by the author of Ice Rigger. That suggests to me that Ice Rigger was actually very successful when it came out, but I haven't seen it. I don't know if that's good because people aren't selling their copies. Not sure I've ever read it either. Anyhow, so the first thing to mention about Orphan Star is that it is very much a number 2 in the series. And if you can read the Tarim Krang first, I don't think that's a terrible idea. It's a great book, by the way. But Orphan Star was the one I read first of Alan Dean Foster's books in general, and his Humanx Commonwealth in particular. It does stand alone as an independent novel remarkably well. Remember, written in the 70s, published in 77. Back in the days when authors had to be able to write a book, not to commit to a series that's going to last 5 decades, leaving the poor reader unable to finish the story. This starts well. It does recap a couple of the things that happened in the previous book, enough so you understand where Flinx is when we start, which is back on his home planet of Moth, the amazing planet that instead of being a ringed planet like Saturn is a winged planet because the wing got broken up and you've got these 2 little fluttering wings circling the planet, making it look like a moth. He's got back after his adventures with the Krang, and the merchant he was traveling with, Malaika, something like that, was grateful enough that Flinx is actually quite well-to-do. Despite having been brought up in the marketplace as a pickpocket, a thief, a juggler, a general part of the rabble of Moth, he is now comfortable enough to buy his adopted mother Mastiff, a shop in a comfortable part of town and not have to work for his living for a while. That payout is important because otherwise it would be hard for the reader to understand how a semi-itinerant youth from the marketplace would have the funds to do all the really exciting things that happen in this book. The first book is exciting. This one is exciting and deceptively fast-paced because these are not huge books. This one is just 206 pages long. And yet so much happens at it that I actually needed the notes that I wrote significantly, because by the end all the exciting stuff that had happened in the middle and toward the end had totally eclipsed the beginning sequences of the story. So one of the first things that happens here is that Flinx is kidnapped. He's kidnapped in a unique way. He's wandering through the marketplace toward his favorite bar, which is run by Little Sim, Little being over almost 3 meters tall and strong to match. And he's being followed by 2 ruffians who are really concerned about his flying mini dragon. That's Pip, which is an incredibly poisonous Alaskan dragon. Poisonous empathetic, possibly telepathic to some extent. And the way they get around this dragon in their attempt to kidnap him is by waiting for him in the bog, toilet, loo, restroom, whatever you want to call it, depending on where you are in the world, for Flinx to come out of the bar there. They knock him unconscious, and when he wakes up, he's in this luxurious, transparent bubble in one of the merchant towers. Now, we've been in a merchant tower, if you've read the first book already, with his friend Maxim Malika. But this isn't Malika, who's still off-world. This is a different merchant called Chalice, and Chalice is got some truly unspeakable hobbies, which Alan Dean Foster only ever hints at. We don't see too much of the nastiness. And what he needs is someone with telepathic abilities to help manipulate an incredibly rare object that he calls the Janus Jewel. The Janus Jewel has got these flecks of pigment in a liquid suspension right in the center of a crystalline matrix. And with telepathic abilities, these can be manipulated to create little plays. Instead of just asking Flinx if he's willing to, he kidnaps him and cuffs him and threatens him, because he basically knows that the things that he wants to portray in the jewel are too disgusting for a normal human being to be willing to engage with. Now, before Flinx finds all this out, he meets Chalice's daughter, Manahimi. She is a beautiful, doll-like, childish little girl child, but Flinx, with his telepathy, senses that there's a lot more going on under the surface there than anyone suspects, which becomes an ongoing plot element. So after having been tortured a little bit, shown what he wants to, Chalice showing him what he wants to do, hearing the fury in Manahimi's mind, all this setting up for the rest of the book, Flinx is rescued from the tower by Pip, who has followed him telepathically, and little Sim, who's willing to crush anyone who opposes them. However, as the merchant is fleeing, he throws a last comment back over his shoulder at Flinx, saying, "I'm sorry you proved recalcitrant. Your maternal line suggested you would," or something like that. And that was like a red rag to a bull, because Flinx grew up an orphan. He was purchased off the slavers' block by his adopted mother, Mother Mastiff. He knows nothing about his parentage or his hereditary. We're told what he looks like, but we're not told more than that, and he doesn't know more than that. He really wants to find out. Now, as a consequence of this loosely flung comment, he uses the money given him by the merchant from his first adventure to pursue Chalice off planet. The first thing he does is head for Hive Home. Now, pursuing Chalice around the universe gives us, hello bird, bird. We have a bird. We have a loud bird. Gives Alan Dean Foster a chance to show us the truly fascinating world building he's done. His Humanx Commonwealth is really, to my mind, unique. Now, I know that nearly every science fiction writer has some sort of united planets of humankind, etc. But I think perhaps it's because this is one of the earliest ones I encountered, unless you include Star Trek. I think this is the most rounded, most fascinating, and the one I would most like to spend more time in. Unfortunately, most people who ever have Alan Dean Foster books don't seem to get rid of them. So it is kind of a progressive, well-intentioned liberal democracy. It's a bit like the United Federation of Planets from Star Trek, but it's unique in having two main species branches. One is the humans, whose base is on Earth, and the other one is the Thranks, an intelligent insect species whose home planet is Hive Home. And that is where Flinx's pursuit of Chalice starts. So Flinx takes a KK drive ship to Hive Home, and the KK drive is a fascinating notion That's a picture of one there on the cover. What the ship does is it generates a gravity well into that plug-like thing, which draws the rest of the ship into the gravity well, and including the generator, the gravity well, so it continually progresses through space. The KK drives are enormous and strong and can never land on a planet, but only float from world to world, which is a plot development for later as well. Anyway, he does that, and we have a description of Hive-On, this lush, humid jungle planet. And like all of the planets of the Commonwealth, you've got the areas where the Thranks live, and then the colder, drier, inhospitable to Thranks areas are where humans subsist on the planet. The Mediterranean Plateau, it's called here. And then again, you've got Earth, where humans still live, where humans live, but the Thranks have taken over the areas like the Amazon basin that are really too hot and humid and jungle-esque for humanity to be really comfortable there. Personally, I like the tropics, but each to their own. Anyhow, Flinx pursues Chalice and manages to get close enough to him to confirm his opinions of Manahimi as a malign and strong source of telepathy, possibly even stronger than his own. Chalice is now terrified of Flinx. He won't wait for Flinx long enough to explain what he wants, because all Flinx wants is the records of his parentage and his heritage. Given that, he was perfectly happy to leave Chalice alone. But Chalice, like many people of malign intent, cannot believe that of Flinx. He thinks that Flinx wants revenge, and he flees from him again. The whole section of Hive Home was fascinating because Flinx has to flee on foot through jungles, and we learned that the jungles are apparently barren areas, but they actually overlay the cities of Hive Home, which are all underground. So, when Chalice flees next, Flinx continues on to Earth. That's right, I forgot an element. In encountering Chalice, he gets... that's right. He doesn't do anything horrible to him this time. No one does anything horrible to each other. But he does have to flee in the end because he calls security. But in the course of the interview, Chalice tells Flinx that basically all he knows about him came from a record of him having been born in India, and we've heard that Flinx has quite darkish skin, though red hair. Alamabad, I think it is. And this sends Flinx off to Earth, which is the centre of the United Church. I'd forgotten a fair bit about this part of this novel, and I realised that the last time I read this was so long ago that I hadn't even moved to Brisbane, so a couple of decades since I last read this. Of course, as a teenager, I read and reread this so often that I was virtually word perfect at a point, and it was interesting reading it because it's been so long since I read it, I couldn't actually remember ahead of time what was happening, but as it was happening, I had this vague memory bell. So it was a really interesting reading experience and very enjoyable and quite fast. So when we reach Earth, all of this section felt both new and familiar because when I last read it, I wasn't in those places. Flinx flies into Brisbane, which has become the capital of Earth, which seems incredibly unlikely, having lived in Brisbane, can I tell you? But Alan Dean Foster had clearly been to Australia and liked it. The way he describes Brisbane is very, very tolerant and very, very light touch, but also enjoyable. Flinx from there goes down to the Gold Coast. Oh no, I've got it wrong again. Sorry. Chalice fled from Hive Home to Earth before Flinx could catch up with him. Got it. And he goes down from Brisbane to the Gold Coast, my current hometown, in order to catch up with Chalice and get this information from him. I think I've got it this time. And this was charming because in the 1970s, Alan Dean Foster must have visited the Gold Coast, and it sounds like a beautiful place. He talks about golden hills of sand behind the beaches and all this Lovely stuff. He would probably find the Gold Coast of 2025 unrecognizable, as we've flattened all the beautiful sand mountains and covered them with cement, which is sad. But it gave me a very nostalgic and beautiful view of what the Gold Coast must have been like in the 70s. I did see it some point in the 70s, but I don't remember it well. Okay, so we get this beautiful vision of the Gold Coast, which I loved. This is where one of the snippets of the Orphan Star, the Flinx series that I always remembered, occurs, where Flinx is sitting on a sandbank watching humans and Thranks playing together in the waves. Of course, the Gold Coast is notorious as a surfer destination, and he's talking about humans and Thranks as both body surfing in the waves, and how one human hops onto the back of one of his friend Thranks and basically rides him like a surfboard. It's a very, very evocative image. I've always remembered it, and I've always enjoyed it. Now, while he was in Brisbane, Flinx thought of a method of getting information out of Chalice. And it is pure science fiction. He went to a very specialist agency, and what he did there, we learn as Chalice sees a Flinx walking up the driveway, screams in terror at his bodyguard, who vaporizes Flinx. Shortly after that, a second Flinx arrives. And though he does a little bit better, Flinx still kills him before getting any information out of him, which is when he realizes it's a robot. A third Flinx arrives, this time with Pip. And he tells Chalice that he should have noticed that he didn't have Pip because Pip is always with him. Throughout all this, Manahimi is screaming her head off, but she's a little tot of 3 or 4, and Chalice basically ignores her. Manahimi, of course, as an incredibly strong telepath, realizes that none of these Flinxes are real people. But since she's ignored and sent to her room, this third Flinx with Pip manages to get the information out of Chalice that he's been looking for all along, and is all he wanted. Which is basically what I mentioned before, how Chalice got the information about his maternal line. So having got that, he leaves the house and says to Chalice, "You'll never see me again." Chalice says, "I certainly won't." Explodes Flinx at the door, and once again discovers he's a robot. Sitting there on the golden sands of the Gold Coast, Flinx sends the directive for the remaining robots to return to base and give a little bit of a refund to him. He had allowed for all of this. Now, having got this information out of Chalice, Flinx continues on to another one of my favourite spots, Bali. Alan Dean Foster must have gone there and loved it as much as I and many other Australians do. He almost rhapsodizes over the beauty of the place. Now, Flinx has tried to fly there and is told that he can't, that the entire island of Bali is reserved for the locals and for the United Church, which has a particular name, which I have forgotten. Might just be the United Church, actually. So we've heard a little bit about this United Church in the first book. Basically, it accepts humans, Thranks, anyone else who wants to. It doesn't try to attract or recruit new members. It is very high in theology and low in preaching. And it sounds quite interesting. Now, since Flinx can't fly there, he evolves this fascinating method of getting there, which involves going to a neighbouring island, pretending to be a local, which he can because he's got darkish skin, he just needs to blacken his hair, and going across on a small boat. Once he gets there, he finds a compliant taxi driver and explains to him he's come to see relatives in Singaraj, a place I like, and would like to do a tour first. So he does a tour of the island and finally ends up in the records or possibly the base of the United Church. All through this, we see Bali through the eyes of someone who absolutely loves it. We see the rice paddies, we see the beautiful people. The taxi driver lectures Flinx a little bit, but in a good way, about the beauty of the Balinese, and likens his flying mini drag Pip to a Garuda, a protective dragon spirit, of which there's one on the wall behind me. A Barong and a Garuda, both there. From the first time I went to Bali. So Flinx penetrates the church, which he imagined barbed wire and guards and a whole heap of stuff, but no, he basically walks into it with very little problem. And once he's there, it's buried in there's one or two unpretentious buildings on the side of Mount Agang, which is the active volcano. United Church, there we go. I made a note about it. When he gets there, we get further introduction to the church as he wanders around the foyer, completely empty of tourists, with no other visitors, and enjoys the beauty of it, which gives us more of a perspective into Alan Dean Foster's Human X Commonwealth and United Church in a very organic, very enjoyable way. To the right of the relief, there were engraved some of the basic maxims of the church. And Alan Dean Foster uses these maxims to explain to us how different this religion, this universal religion, is to any of the religions we have on earth today, which they have effectually absorbed. We learn in the first one that they've absorbed pretty much any religion you can think of. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Baha'i, all of them have got, animism for that matter, have all gone into this religion, as have any of the religions of the Thranks, which I don't remember very well. One motto that I thought was really interesting was, if God wished man and Thranks to devote themselves to him, he would not have made the world so complicated. I like that. I like what Alan Dean Foster's doing here with religion. Now, here's another point to recognise. That was on page 77. On page 81, when he finally gets into the church and starts getting some answers, and we're not even halfway through this book. And we're 20 minutes into me raving about this book. There's a lot more that happens. He gets the information from the archives, but he also finds out that whoever originally got the information out wiped a whole lot. The church aren't impressed. Their records aren't meant to be tampered with, and they feel that someone needs to be caught and disciplined for this. Angry Bird. They ask Flinx if he ever finds out who did it to let them know. He says yes. Flinx doesn't trust the church. He doesn't trust any organisation very much. And the way that Flinx is designed is very consistent with his background, where authorities are things to be gotten around and not trusted. So he doesn't really trust the church. He doesn't trust them enough to share information about his telepathy and empathic abilities, which are then showcased as an intruder into the church is found. Now this whole story, what's up? Where are we going? Is tied in with the Janus Jewel, which Chalice first kidnapped Flinx in order to use. Throughout we hear these tiny little bits from other Janus jewels that have induced important researchers, people like that throughout the Commonwealth, to suicide or kill themselves. So we know there's something excessive happening. And, okay, come on. There you go. Good chicken. Now the hereditary enemy, because there has to be an enemy to any good Commonwealth, we know that, of the Thranks, Human-Anx Commonwealth, the humans and the Thranks, are the Aan. How do you pronounce a word beginning with two A's? I don't know. An. One of those things. What? You want to see yourself? No, you don't. You're not interested in yourself. I know that. The intruder that Flinx captures inside the church is an Aan, and Flinx notices that the Aan has a lot of crystalline powder on him, which the church officials believe to be weapon, but he thinks it may be Janus Jewel. But unwilling to share any of the details of his background knowledge of these things, and unwilling to share any of the details of his mind powers, he leaves, and he leaves with a member of the church who he is kind of kidnapping. He saved her life in rescuing her from the Aan, but then calls in a life debt in order to get her to come with him. He has decided that he needs to go to a particular world. That world is under edict. He needs a churchman to help him get in, and he takes her with him. As a cute tie into the first book, her name is Sil Zenzuzek, and she is actually a relative of True Zenzuzek, a Thranx ex-churchman character we met from the first book. There's a lot here. They make it to this new world, and something momentous occurs. Flinx discovers a whole race of highly telepathic, highly intelligent Ursinoid that apparently the reason this world has been put under edict, the church not wanting any contact between them and the rest of the Federation. Sorry, the Commonwealth. So there's a lot there. At the end of this book, Flinx does actually find out something more about his heritage, which I'm not going to tell you because you should read this book. It's a good book. And I enjoyed discovering it a lot and rediscovering it, though I had some glimmerings of memory. The conclusion to this book is a tie into some of the characters from the previous book, and it is so much fun. It is really fast-paced, exciting, so many concepts that, like I said, by page 200, the first part of this book seemed aeons away. This book gave me as much enjoyment as some trilogies do, and as much story development, world building development, and diverse characters. Extremely well written, in my opinion. Extremely worth reading. Enjoyed the hell out of it. Not for the first time, as you can clearly see from internal evidence. I think it used to once have some front pages, but that was many, many long years ago. Anyway, I'm hanging on to my copy. Love the artwork, love the story. Will reread it again sooner or later, I'm sure, because I have been for so many years. And having finished it last night and enjoyed it so much, I went from Orphan Star straight on to The End of the Matter, which will be my next review, I am pretty sure. Beautiful covers, great book, thoroughly enjoying them. Why aren't more people talking about Alan Dean Foster's standalone novels and his series? This isn't the only series he has. His Commonwealth series, his Human X Commonwealth Universe are one, but he has over 20 standalone books as well as all the other books he did. Don't be put off by the fact that he did a lot of novelizations of movies and so forth. They're good too. Read them. Or else, I don't know, read other good books. Thank you very much for watching this far, and I will see you in the next Alan Dean Foster review.